G'day legends and happy Monday. I hope that you are having a great start to your week and I hope that you had a fantastic weekend. At least I hope that you had a better weekend than I. Of course, I finished my chemotherapy last week, but the days following, the 48-72 hours after the last dose, that is typically the worst time for me as that drug is really saturated all through my body. Now, please just take into account that this specific chemotherapy is treating a brain tumour. So, of course, this crosses the blood-brain barrier and is targeting my brain. So, I do struggle with some recall, some vocabulary as well. I do struggle some of the sort of academic level critical thinking also. So just bear with me for a couple of days before I somewhat get over the hump of this. It is targeting the one thing that I bloody need. Now, a bit of a funny before we get right into it. On Friday, so probably the worst day of my chemo, I had a water pipe burst under my floor, which flooded then a level as well, which was great because then I was in the dirt, bloody crawling around stumps under my property, vomiting, looking like a vomiting Viet Cong bloody soldier. So that was great and probably the best health time to do it as well. So we're going to get into a lot today. We're going to look at the maps and I need to push back on some, I don't even know what, cope criticism, whatever you'd like to call it, about maps. I got a lot of people going, Willie only shows Russian map updates. He's not showing any Ukrainian map gains. Now, my pushback would be the primary map that I use is Deep State, of course, which is tied in with the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, but also I'm not showing Ukrainian map gains or where Ukraine has moved the blue line of the map, because for the last 18 months, this has been very, very minimal, with the exception of Kursk, which of course we have shown, and Uspanivkia recently around the Pokrovsk front, but I can't show something if it doesn't exist for the day. So I don't know, I'll show any map changes that are there or any geolocations that show different to the maps. We're also going to talk about a Russian Su-30 fighter jet going down from a drone boat with an AIM-9 missile aboard it. And then I want to link this back into a video last week where we spoke about could Ukraine do something like this to take down the very elusive Su-34. I want to talk about Victory Parade on May 9th and could we see a Ukrainian attack? Could we see a false flag happen there? What are the odds of that? What do I see potentially occurring? But where I want to start is I want to start with something that I think is just a massive, massive misunderstanding of the state of this war. And I know I push back on this a lot, but I really think that this is influencing decisions and it is very, very dangerous. And I think propagandists like this and completely just bullshit information are getting people killed, honestly, and is prolonging in areas which will deteriorate further. So the reason I'm sharing this article is I've not seen an article shared more than this by very, very high up people who are trusted in information spheres as well. And I want to show you that Mr. Brain Tumour on chemo here, I can dismantle this whole thing as I'm about to do. Now, Forbes by Mr. David Axe, they posted this. At the current rate, it would take Russia centuries and tens of millions of casualties to capture Ukraine. And this has gone just absolutely everywhere. Okay, so let's look over this. Russian forces managed to capture 68 square miles of Ukraine in April, so 186 kilometre squares. That's according to Deep State, which is more than that figure, so I don't know where that's pulled from, but it cost the Russians here 4,800 vehicles and 36,500 dead and wounded troops, according to one statistician who collects data mostly from official Ukrainian sources, including the general staff in Kyiv. Yes, because during wartime, official figures like that are going to be reliable. I don't care if they're from Ukraine or from Russia or from Belarus or from the UK, they're not going to be reliable at wartime. And even once this war is done, we're probably going to get at best a range. Okay? In the same month, the Ukrainian losses were minimal. Please see to above here the reliability of figures during wartime. And this is done for a reason. Informational war is very important. I'm not saying they shouldn't do this for informational war. If Australia was in a war with a greater power, I'd suggest we do the same thing for information. But as an analyst here, we need to look through some of that. We can't use just that data, okay? If someone just used the Russian data, he'd also say it was bullshit. Now, Ukraine sprawls across 233,000 square miles, 19% of which is under Russian occupation. At the current rates of advance and loss, the Russians would capture the rest of Ukraine in the year 2256 at the cost of 101 million casualties. The current population of Russia is 144 million, with demographic issues I shall add. But David, war is not and has never been linear. This is a ridiculous figure to pull out of this. It would be as ridiculous if Russia had a breakthrough tomorrow of 10 kilometres in an area, and I said, well, given that, they're going to be in Kyiv in 15 days. As ridiculous as if someone said, well, in the first day of the Kursk offensive, Ukraine gained, say, let's go 10 kilometres, then they're going to be in Moscow in 10 days. It's just ridiculous to do this. And the amount of people that I've seen sharing this and taking this as just how everything goes and how war goes, it concerns me. Now, incredibly staggering losses in people and equipment haven't yet crippled the Russian military in Ukraine. Well, then maybe question the data. If you're saying that the losses here should have then crippled it, then maybe question the actual amount that has happened. And he says here that General Christopher Cavoli, commander of US Army forces in Europe, he is saying that Russia is recruiting 30,000 troops a month. So even at this rate, really, the replacement is there. Now, realistically, we know these figures is very hard to actually get during wartime. But you can just see the problem here in taking war as some sort of linear trajectory. And what I say is, Davo, attritional war doesn't work like this. This is attritional war, mate. Attritional war is much like bankruptcy. It's little by little, and then you have all at once. This can happen militarily, economically, or for society on a whole too. And of course, this is what people are wanting out of the sanctions. They want Russia to little by little and then all at once. And Russia, on the other hand, they want Ukraine militarily little by little, then all at once. I often use the term across an event horizon. And if you know anything about, I guess, black holes and where that comes from, the event horizon is crossed when there's no turning back, that everything is into then the black hole. And this is, I think, a good analogy, because if you're an observer of this, you don't really see the point at which someone crosses that event horizon. You'll see them clear as day, and then they'll sort of fade out. And that's what it's like observing attritional war. And if you are that one that's crossing, you may actually not know when that point has been crossed until you're in a phase of spaghettification as well. So, and this has been done before also. Let's have a look at this propaganda poster from the Second World War. Now, we'll go over it, but this is a World War II propaganda leaflet dropped on Allied positions intended to demoralise Allied troops for the slow pace through Italy, of course, dropped by Germans. So here we go. We see this, that it's going to take that 650 kilometres to Berlin. It's going to be there in 1952. But in reality, a war like this, between September 44 and September 45, somehow I've written this backwards, it took 9 months to move from Salerno to Rome, 125 kilometres. By April 1945, the Allies, they made 400 kilometres alone and broke through the Gothic line, a major defensive line. German forces then surrendered in Italy on May the 2nd, 1945. So I think this is a good example, looking back in history, of that war does not work like that. It's not a pretty line on a map going up. It is all over the place, and much like if you were to assess the S&P 500, you need to zoom out to get a better idea of how this is, because we could take 1 day of statistics or a 1 month even. It's just not going to give an accurate picture of what is occurring. So let's talk about this Su-30 and these drone boats. And this is something we really need to go over. Now, this image has come out today saying that it's showing a Magura V7. Remember the ones we spoke about previously were Magura V5 naval drone boats equipped with an AIM-9 air-to-air missile. Now, some are suggesting that this is an AIM-120. In my opinion, these missiles are far, far too small to be an AIM-120. But air-to-air missiles. Now, there is some contention that this image is fake, is photoshopped up, and the low quality doesn't help assess if it is or isn't, and sometimes then lower quality images are doctored because it is hard to tell. But let's just say that this is real for what we're going to speak about, because I think it highly likely is, because we have seen a Russian Su-30 SM downed over the Black Sea, drone boat with an air-to-air missile on it. And then this is coming out, Occam's razor likely is real. Now, this is a concept that we saw well over a year ago using Soviet R-73 missiles. And we have seen then helicopters go down, but not any aircraft. Now, we did say the other day there was speculation that there was either an A-50 or a Tu-22 go down from one of these, but in the post the Ukrainian ministry made about this, they said it's a world first of taking down an aircraft. So what we can say is, a year ago, those R-73s, they may have taken down some choppers, but they didn't take down any aircraft from that. That's at least how I'm seeing that. Now, this concept, this is what we talked about last week, is could you use this en masse as a way to take down Su-34s? Now, they're not going to be on drone boats because they're operating in areas, say in the east and the north, but could you put something like an AIM-9, an R-73, something on a drone, like a flying drone, and target those Su-34s, because they are dropping a shitload of fabs. I believe an increase in fabs. I'll show you that with the mapping sector. And this is what we went over last week, is could you see something like this instead of having it strapped on something like an F-16? Now, we went over last week limitations of these style of missiles. Now, what you cannot do, and a lot of people are doing, is taking ranges from books and the internet and whatever of these missiles. Now, firstly, much like Volkswagen, these are going to be then on the perfect conditions of efficiency, clear skies, certain altitude, whatever, but also these type of missiles, whether it's an R-73, an AIM-9, whatever, is going to get a boost from the kinetic energy of the aircraft moving forward at Mach fuck, or then potential equity from dropping in gravity as well and getting that initial boost, where these are going to be going relatively incredibly slow. So a lot of fuel is going to be used just to get it from 20 k's an hour to very quick. So you're not going to get the range that you would get off the rails of an aircraft. So don't quote those ranges, but these are incredibly deadly still, due to how the missile, without a living person in it, can handle G-force. So what we see here is this footage shown by the Ukrainian forces of then said to be that Su-30 going down. Now, some say this is a different aircraft, but what we do know is something has definitely gone down here. Now, fighter bomber, he has confirmed this, and the crew of a dry cargo ship, they lifted the military pilots today. This is a two-seater plane, and both men in that have been recovered. I've seen a lot of people say, oh, sadly, they were recovered. With aircraft, I'm always very happy when people are recovered from an ejection, because as far as I'm aware, if you eject out of an aircraft, the odds of you ever flying again are very, very low. The tool is the aircraft. Once they're out of the aircraft under canopy, they are a non-combatant at that point. There's actually specific laws about being under canopy as well. So, as I said last week with the Su-27, did it go down in Ukraine? And this, I'm glad that those guys got out of that aircraft. And Fighter Bomber has spoken about this just a little bit, and he says that there were 36 of these Bex drone boats with these style of man pads on board as well. So a mass attack here. And I do believe with the limited range that these are going to have, it's going to have to be used, much like other drones, in very large numbers. He does say about the difficulties of actually targeting these as well for visibility off planes, as well as the susceptibility of then having helicopters in the air too. So these are going to be a major headache. But much like other things in the Black Sea, this is not going to change the momentum of the war at this point in time. I do believe that the Su-34 is an incredibly important thing to try and get on top of and take down, and I'd be interested to see something like this on some larger, like quad-rotor drone, where you would get that potential energy from the drop as well. I know it's going to be expensive in huge numbers, But the amount of fabs getting dropped, which are incredibly devastating, is huge. So let's talk about Victory Day. On May 9th, we will see then on Red Square, massive parade celebrating, remembering the end of the Second World War, or the fall of Berlin to the Soviet forces. And what I will say on this is there's a lot of like revisionist history about the war and what ended the Nazi part in the Nazis in Berlin as well. People remember history how I guess they want to remember it, maybe not how it actually then occurred. And we see Trump, he's done this as well. Now, could there be potential attacks? And we have seen Zelensky hint multiple times about potential attacks during the parade. We can't guarantee the safety, blah, blah, blah. Now, as I stated last week, I believe that this is probably the most silly thing Ukraine can do. Firstly, optics, how it looks. Now, I understand that many European leaders, they would wet themselves from excitement if this occurred, but the countries most important to Ukraine at this point are the fence sitters, sort of like your swing states, because Germany and Poland and whatever has already been in France, they've already been won over. These are the ones Ukraine needs to focus on. You see a lot of diplomacy going around trying to win these over, and many of these nations are then on the fence, swing, or they're actually attending this as well. So it would look like it was some level of act of terror. And I believe optically that would be potentially disastrous for how Ukraine is in the vision of those states. Remember, the world is not just the EU and America, Canada, and Australia and Japan, okay? And especially in the future, that is going to become more and more relevant too. Now, the US, they may or may not be in this basket because personally with Trump's revisionist history of World War II, I just don't really know anymore either. Now, secondly, that Xi Jinping, leader of China, that he is attending. Now, I think this alone should be enough to deter any attacks. The last thing anyone wants, US to Ukraine, is to push Xi and Putin closer. Now, a few Chinese nationals fighting for Russia from a population of 1.5 billion people, that's not Chinese participation, and a few golf carts in the Russian forces, that is also not Chinese industrial participation in this war. If Xi really wanted, he could strangle Ukraine's entire drone industry literally overnight, and he could supply the Russians with 10 replacements to every single bit of equipment that has been lost in this war so far. So I think the threat of that probably is enough, I say probably, to deter any attacks, just Xi being there, because that is a huge deal. Now, this of course raises the question of false flags. Now, before we go into this, I'm not going to go over these slides. I've presented them a lot, but I'm going to open them, and if you'd like to screenshot them, go for it now. Now, this is when you have false flags, and these are some of the reasons for it. Screenshot away. And this is then why you conduct false flags. Again, screenshot away. When and why do you have these? Okay, and this next bit I'm going to tell you is based on that. Now, the risk versus reward of a false flag is massive. Okay, it's huge. And it's way more likely that a false flag comes from the side without momentum or initiative on the battlefield. Okay, that's why I said in late 2022, it was more likely to see a Russian false flag, and throughout 24-25, it's more likely to see a Ukrainian false flag than a Russian one. Also, a false flag conducted by Russia, if it is going to have a lot of people very skeptical straight away. It's not going to be as believed as something happening, and it may have been the Ukrainian forces who did it. Okay, now, so I think this is unlikely because regardless of what Ukraine did or does, it's not going to waver European support. So even if Ukraine does have an attack or Russia launch a false flag attack, it's not going to change that European support. We saw direct attacks against German strategic infrastructure and no one really gave a shit, okay? But the risk versus reward and the risk of those fence sitters we spoke about from an attack, that remains very high if it is found out. Now, in my opinion, I think Putin and his senior advisors, they believe that they can get everything they want through the current battlefield conditions, attrition, and time. Okay? So the justification of escalation that a false flag may bring, I just don't believe at this point, given the risk, would actually appeal to them. Of course, because the US, they could pull out an Uno reverse card too and supply a shitload more in. So it's definitely something that could happen. I just don't think it is super highly likely. Now, this section I've named the Willy Tard, but a double false flag is not off the table either to undermine Russia further. A double false flag, for those who aren't aware, very, very simply, is that Ukraine carry out an attack, but assuming that everyone will blame Russia to try to stage a false flag. So everyone will go, oh, Russia conducted a false flag, but it was actually a Ukrainian intelligence attack. Now, again, there's a reason I've named it Willy Tard, but again, it's just worth going over, and we may, let me know if you'd like in the comments, would you be interested, I guess, if we do a live stream of the victory parade in Moscow? We could do that. Now, let's have a look at the maps. Now, I just wanted to bring up this slide first off. Now, we have seen over the past 3 days, as I've been offline, a lot of FAB strikes, from FAB 250s all the way to a lot of FAB 3000s as well, actually. Lots in Kupiansk and Kherson. So just keep that in mind. I've seen a lot of that. The chemo makes me feel like I'm going to vomit the entire time. It's bloody terrible. So let's have a look on the maps, and we're going to wind back a couple of days, and I'll show you some bits and pieces. So the first area I want to come into is then the Pokrovsk Eastern Front, all the way between Toretsk and Tatasivkia area. Now, what we're going to do is we're actually just going to turn off this red check. Remember, the red check is indicating Russian advances over the past 24 hours. And if we come back to, I believe around the 1st is when I last spoke to you, we can see where, oh, that's not wrong. We can see where then this is then moving over these days. Now, again, it's not very clear to see that. So I've got some screenshots that I prepared earlier, which will show this much, much more simply. Give me 1 second. So, we saw on the 2nd of May, Tatasivkia, Sukabalka areas then filling in. Then on the 3rd, more areas around Tatasivkia, then expanding. This is according to Deep State. And then to today, again, Tatasivkia further expanding to the south of Alexandropol. Now, let's have a look. Then we have today's Deep State map on your right-hand side, and then Suryak map from then 3 days ago. And you can see much, much further movements that he is suggesting that this intersection, this very important intersection here, he is suggesting has come back under control of the Russian forces, and they have moved well past Tatasivkia and into this Novolenivkia as well. So right up into here and further expansion. Now, what can we take from this? Well, what we can take is there was definitely Russian advancement in this area. How far? Well, we do not know. And then we have the day after that Suryak update and significant more shifts just slightly west of here. So in and around this sector as well, taking control over this Yeli Zanativkia as well, and further expansion of this intersection, so all through this area and slightly to the west of there as well. And further down just in this small pockety area, which is here, down in here, as well as just to this north of Sukabalka, which does line up with what we saw the day previous to the one I have up at the moment. And then further movements as well on the Tatasivkia front. We bring this back up, further movements up this map near Novo Poltavkia as well, and further expansion in through Alexandropol as well. So what I'm trying to show you on this is, see where Suryak is showing this? It may be shown in slightly different areas, but we know there's definite movement in this axis, so then therefore we can confirm there was definitely some movement. It was minimum, what Deep State is showing, probably maximum, what Suryak is showing. Again, Suryak is very, very reliable on the maps. That's why we use it. I don't care if people don't like the information coming, he, more often than not, is very reliable on it. Multiple times we see things, then 2 weeks later, we're going, oh, Syriac showed that. Okay, let's talk about Pokrovsk. Now, no changes shown today, but back on the 3rd, so yesterday, we saw movements around this front line. So we really refer to this as the Zaporizhzhia area. Now, it's not Zaporizhzhia Oblast, it's Zaporizhzhia. There's a small settlement in here. So movements out to the north, to the west, and just to the south of here above Andriivka, which sits just in here as well as some movement around Shevchenko. Then we will open the Syriac maps as well. Let me put these in order. And we can confirm more movement around these areas. That they took over positions south of Uspannivka, so this area he's suggesting has been filled in, and then areas around Lysivka, in between Lysivka and Zelene, just in here as well. So not the exact axis, but we know there was movement here. Now, before we go any further, something we do need to look at is this is Dnipro Oblast, and Russia is advancing in this direction very, very close to that. I think informationally, that is a very important thing if they were to get some level of foothold. Now, as we can see, Pokrovsk, second map, aka yesterday, we can see these movements in here. Now, this one right in here to the south of Uspannivka, around this, this area right here, I can't even try and pronounce that, but we can see in here there was definitely some level of movement in here by grey zone as well. And as well, this movement right in here, remember, the red check showed that. So we can definitely confirm that movement in here too. Now, let's open up the final one that we have in here. Now, there is a few changes on this. So further movement through this Novu Lek Sandrivkia. Okay, that was better than I thought. And as well as recapturing areas just to the south of Kotlene as well. Further expansion around these areas. But also that there was then, clashes between Ukrainian and Russian forces near this village, this Kotylarivka, right in here too, and a correction put on these maps. So I guess we have a gain there, or at least a correction. So you can see where this lines up with a Syriac map like that. Now, let's move our way to Terni, because if we then turn this on, we can see a large amount of ground being made around Terni, Nove. Now, Nove, in my opinion, this is going to be all red at the moment. I believe that Nove and most of Lipove has come under Russian control. If we were to measure this as of advances today, we're talking that 2.7 kilometers, when realistically it's probably that over the past week or so, or else Syriac has that crystal ball we speak of. Now, we can close that one because that is today's. And again, Syriac, he showed these already, these movements around here. So no updates on these, but he does have just to the south. Russia's putting a lot of resources, man, machine, in and around Terni. So we're just going to go back, and I wanted to see no real grey zone shift around Yampalivkia, because Syriac is showing that there was further advancement down south of here. So again, the best way to do this is just line up where these reservoirs are. So right down into this sector, that there was at least a push here, maybe by a reconnaissance element, but didn't make any confirmed territory. And then the day after, showing that there was then occupation of a fish farm just north of Torsky. So in and around then this sector right in here. So we know there's still a lot of movement around here, and I've said about the dangers of this expanding. It doesn't need to expand to the Oskil if it gets within FPV range of Oskil, around, so I said 10k, so I'm trying to remember where this was. How far is Karpivka? So if it gets to around Karpivka, this becomes very dangerous for this whole sector up in here, okay? Now, let's go back, and we'll move our way down to Seversk. We're bumping around the maps a little bit today because we have a lot to go over. So we have the Bilahorivkia, Seversk front line in here, which we have seen some changes on over the past few weeks, which we hadn't seen for months, if not years. Now these show significantly different. Last 10 days, Russian Army made new advances southwest of Bilahorivkia. So again, this shows dramatically different because you have the chalk quarry here, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And then this is showing advancements right up into these areas up in here. So significantly further back, as well as movement into this Verkhono-Makansky as well. Then we'll bring up the next map, and he's showing further movements just to the northwest of the chalk quarry. So down along this area here with reaching some of the ruins of Hirovkia as well. So in this sector. So just keep an eye out on this. Again, before we confirm any of that, we really do need some more geolocations or more maps confirming that also. So let's turn this off because we've gone through all those. Let's go up into then Kursk and Sumy region. Now, no changes shown on this map of Kursk. There was a Russian flag flown about here where my cursor is today, but no massive change away from the maps. Let's have a look at this Syriac map of then Sumy. So what we can see is this area in here, this grey zone is shown as red as far as what they are saying Russia occupy back in Sumy. Now, if this is red, like it is said, and this is 80 to 90 square kilometres as claimed, that goes back to Davo's article at the start, which it's going to be more like 250, 260 kilometre squares over April, and that may change some of your trajectories, mate, even on a linear way. Now, in the last 48 hours, Russian army took control of 65% of the locality of Bilavody. So this is Bilavody in here, where we can see the grey zone up to here, but he's saying 65% of that has come then under control. Now, continue moving our way down again. Sorry for all of the bouncing around. And we're looking then for Raihorodka, which sits just in here. And then we're looking for Kopanki as well. And we'll bring up this one here. Bad spelling. But the Russian army retook full control over the locality of Persho-Travneve in here. And map corrections were made near Kopanki, which is practically under the control of the Ukrainian army. So again, these are actually looking fairly similar in this area at this point in time. Now, move our way down. Bakhmut will be next, an area I'm sure you're familiar with, but more on these, we're referring to it as the Solidar front, but this Hirovkia area in here, just to the north of Chasiv Yar, because the best way to line up is where the reservoir is running through here, and he's suggesting just a small movement out in this sector where my cursor is at the moment. Next will be then Toretsk, tucked down in here. No changes shown in the last couple of days in this map. These areas are incredibly difficult to get an idea of what is actually occurring in here because it is very, very fluid. Now we can see that out from then Kriminsky Dashny area, he's suggesting at least that this area in here, there's a reservoir, looks like a fishhook, that's come under Russian control, as well as where this paddock comes to an ending, that it's come under control here as well, including that reservoir. Again, bloody difficult to know what is going on just on Toretsk. I think just the safest option is just to wait out for a little bit and we will get a better idea. Then we'll move our way down into what were the island boys of Rozliv and Bayhatar as well. Now, a lot of fabs are being dropped in Bayhatar over the past week, and then we see, at least according to Syriac, that the Russian army entered the first houses of Bayhatar. Again, we can't confirm this, but if true, does show an advancement behind the line from the closest area to here of about 3.3 kilometres. So wait out on that. And then, of course, we have the Velika Novosilka, which a lot of mappers haven't confirmed is actually fallen yet. It may have shown it, but they haven't actually confirmed because they don't want to they focus on propaganda. Then we see that situation at this front. Russian army took a series of positions between Novosilka and Vilny Pole. So showing that this area is coming under control and further in the direction of Vilny Pole as well. So just wait out more advancements in here, but we have seen day after day some movements here. I'm surprised we haven't seen more in and around the sort of Mala Tokmachka Otoki front line, but we did show you some geolocations that did suggest far different to this last week. Legends. I'm actually pretty happy with how that went, being how I'm feeling. You have a fantastic day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.